For 10 years before I started WaterPIO, I was the head of communications and/or customer service departments for water utilities, major water utilities. And during that work, I saw firsthand how many utilities across the country, no matter their size, no matter their location, they really struggled with customer, media, or crisis comms especially. And I'm a crisis person. I'm a certified crisis communicator. And they were kind of one incident away from losing their reputations for years to come.
Welcome to the Make Water Work podcast, where we dive into the people, ideas, and innovations shaping the future of water. I'm your host, Isaac Pellerin, and alongside my co-host, Megan Glover, the founder of 120 Water, we bring you insights from hundreds of incredible conversations we've had over the past 9 years with inspiring and energizing leaders in the water industry. Each week, we share those stories and conversations with entrepreneurs, community champions, and innovators who are making water work for everyone. Whether you're a water professional, a curious innovator, or simply passionate about our most precious resource, this podcast is for you. Let's get started.
Well, welcome everyone to the Make Water Work podcast, where Isaac and I talk to water professionals serving the water industry, innovating and making change. And today's guest is definitely a change maker in the industry, Mike McGill.
I've had so many great conversations with Mike, sometimes at conferences, sometimes over a drink after conferences, but I always come away learning something, and I've never come away doubting his passion for water utilities, the way he works for water utilities to help them communicate better, and really build their reputation within their communities. And I've always appreciated that about Mike.
No, ditto. And he is an entrepreneur. I mean, we've known Mike probably as long as 120 Water has been around. I have just always appreciated his servant leadership. I mean, he will literally, make both ends of the candle burn just to make the speaking engagements that ultimately serve our communities, make them better operators, make them better communicators. And he really walks the walk and talks the talk. And the talk is right.
Yeah.
He knows what he's talking about.
It is. And this is going to be a great conversation. You'll want to listen in. You'll even get his direct dial number to text him at 3 a.m. if you have a water crisis. But let's tune into this conversation with Mike McGill.
Isaac, I am very excited about this one.
Me too. I've known Mike for quite a while, and Mike, thank you so much for joining us. You've always been a voice of serving the utilities, representing utilities, helping them understand what it means to communicate, what it means to interact in healthy ways with the public, with their local media, with regulators, kind of the full gamut, and really utilities of any size. And so I think we're going to have an incredible conversation. And so yeah. In fact, you're calling, we're doing this podcast. Tell us where you are today.
I am in a random conference room in Orangeburg, South Carolina. I just gave a speech to South Carolina rural water members. They have a fantastic facility here. So they pull in everybody from basically the bottom third of the state to come to this location to hear and get continuing education credits and to hear about the issues of the day. So they brought me in to talk about drinking water and working with the news media or communicating with the public. So we covered lead, PFAS, taste and odor issues, chlorine changeovers, and fluoride in about 45 minutes. So,
oh my gosh,
hopefully my voice will hold up. Yeah, it was a crash course, but kind of the same principles hold through on all five, and that's what I tried to get across today.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Well, we start every podcast asking all of our guests. We've never met anyone who doesn't have a story about how water found them. So, Mike, how did water find you?
Well, to be honest, we found each other in a time of need for both of us. So the first decade of my career was in news. I was a national producer for CNN. was a planning producer, planned coverage for the CBS affiliate in Washington, D.C. I left news behind to try and have more of a normal life in public relations work. And my last public relations job was a bit of a nightmare. I had 6 bosses in 2 years. So I went out looking for a new gig, and I wanted a newsier position. And sure enough, the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, which is now WSSC Water, had a need that was right up my alley. They needed someone to go on the air right away because their water mains were popping like popcorn, and they had just been hit with a $1.2 billion consent decree. So they needed someone who knew the media in the DC area, knew how to handle sensitive issues, to get on the air right away. So after a whirlwind set of interviews, I started there in 2007. I was on the air in a week, and I didn't know anything about water or wastewater work. So I crammed like it was a college exam before they told me, you're going on the air. And I've been in water communications ever since. So there was definitely a need kind of on both of our ends when it came to entering the water world.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mike, I feel like we both have over the years bonded over starting our own businesses in water, and how like being that that one person to show up and go to the conferences and do the education and so on and so forth. It's rewarding, but man, it takes a lot of dedication and hard work. So tell us about that. What compelled you to start WaterPIO, and specifically, like, where did you see the gap that you were filling in the industry?
So for 10 years before I started WaterPIO, I was the head of communications and or customer service departments for water utilities, major water utilities. And during that work, I saw firsthand how many utilities across the country, no matter their size, no matter their location, they really struggled with customer, media, or crisis comms especially. And I'm a crisis person. I'm a certified crisis communicator. And they were kind of one incident away from losing their reputations for years to come. But they weren't handling the everyday communications correctly. In our industry, as the same way we've always done it has been considered the proper path for decade after decade. And in this day and age, you can't do communications work that way. But they were doing, they were following that approach. And so we saw the need. Listen, I ate a lot of cup of noodles those first couple of years, but once the bigger issues of the day hit, like lead, like PFAS, the fact that incidents could wreck their reputations, they started seeing what I was offering as a way to go to make sure that they weren't going to be walked out the door the next day. And so fortunately now we're in more than 20 states. But, it was a bit of a slow build. We had to make the case that communicating earlier and more often was the proper path to take.
You mean being your own boss? You weren't eating steaks every night, Mike? Ruth's Chris every night?
No. It was, how it goes. I mean, it was just, you were wondering, I crisscrossed North Carolina, South Carolina, anywhere anybody would have me speak, I would hop in the car and go. But I sure wasn't staying at the W. The hotels I was staying at had numbers in them, like Motel 6. Events like that led to us building a client base that has been with us 6, 7, 8 years now. And that's why I'm here in Orangeburg today. South Carolina rural water was extremely important to me. Charlie Gray, he's the grand poobah of water in the state of South Carolina, and he took a shine to my work early on. So if Charlie wants anything from me, I'm there. Yeah. And that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, that's what we talk a lot about, this industry being so relational, and just how important it is to have those relationships. And with folks like Charlie with the South Carolina Rural Water Association, utilities rely a lot on the resources that they get because they're so under-resourced. And so being able to have someone like you with your expertise be in their awareness is just so incredibly critical. Yeah. And so from that perspective, I'm also thinking about the kind of broadly the trend. What is the gap that utilities face? And let's just dig in a little bit more on that when we face regulatory pressures, financing pressures, those kind of things. Yeah.
Well, the biggest gap is what I just alluded to. That there's still that attitude out there that, listen, we're a monopoly. People can't go anywhere else for their services. If I communicate, I'm opening the door where they're going to be confused. So I'm just going to communicate with them when I absolutely have to. And that is the biggest issue. Utilities, large and small, are not prepared to meet the moment. And for various reasons. Listen, smaller utilities, they don't have the staff or resources. And that's where I'm always emphasizing how affordable we are, how we can make something work for them. Because I didn't start this business to target mid or large utilities. I started for the smaller utilities that didn't have anybody. So that's what we push out there. But larger utilities as well. I mean, I've been brought in on major crisis situations. I've done after action reviews for Austin, Texas, Asheville, North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, where larger utilities have made mistakes for one reason or another that they have to recover from, that they have to learn from and get better about. So that's what I see right now as a gap that we're still continuing to deal with. Are utilities ready to meet the moment? Because that moment can happen at 3:00 in the morning on a Tuesday, and they're not ready for it, and it can impact their reputation for years to come.
Mm-hmm. Mike, I'm just curious, because you've had a career, like decades-long career, are the moments more frequent now? Like, I mean, are the challenges more now, more than ever? I'm just curious.
It's a good question. I think they are greater now because, there's a lot more attention on lead, for example. Flint changed the game for everybody in water communications, no matter what. But now we've seen all the lead and copper revisions, the improvements. So there's a lot more out there that we have to do on that issue. Whereas when lead hit and Flint hit, I was at my utility in Wilmington, North Carolina. All I had to do was put out proactive information why Flint was not going to happen there, and I was fine. That was it. I didn't have to talk about it again for a couple of years. That's not the case now. When we have PFAS, which is obviously a major national issue, it flared up in my backyard. We have standards in place that may or may not hold up. So there's attention on that issue. The public still doesn't know a lot about it, but in locations that have to deal with it, they know, that's an issue. And then we have fluoride. Fluoride is a big driver of new business because there's so much disinformation out there. And, Florida and Utah have moved away from it. Utilities, they're not quite sure what to do. Some are saying we're using it no matter what. Some have to leave themselves wiggle room that they never had before. And some are moving to remove it. In 2007, when I started, I had to deal with a couple of people saying fluoride was poison, but you could just deal with that one-on-one and that issue would go away. Now you have the head of Health and Human Services saying that fluoride makes you dumber. So, that obviously takes things to a different level. So, it's a long roundabout answer. I think more attention is being brought onto it, but let's face it. And this is what I also have to say about water comms today. The public still doesn't think of us first. They're still not taking information from us first. They're only worried about us when there's a bad bill or a bad break or some sort of controversial story. And that still holds true even with the issues that I just rattled off. So in some ways, there's more attention, the issues are bigger, but when you look at it at the core, the customer communication level, it's still the everyday. I'm being charged for this service. Is it worth the money I'm charging for it? Is my water safe? And as long as you've got that covered, you're going to be all right with all the other issues.
Mike, and I think you're hitting on another thing that I really appreciate about you too is keeping a pulse on what's coming from federal, keeping a pulse on legislation, and not just like whether or not like, hey, should we regulate PFAS or this chemical, but looking at it through the lens of what's the impact to the utility because you're so close to utilities of all sizes, hey, yes, but this is really hard to do and almost unattainable without funding. When I think about PFAS, but you're one of the few people that I know that if a legislation gets released on a Friday,
Oh yeah.
Reads it and has a LinkedIn post and is sharing kind of quick hits by Saturday morning.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk. I want to talk about where you see the pulse on regulation, what's that's doing to utilities, and whether they can be prepared or how else we could advocate.
So I just finished speaking about this. The regulations are up in the air. We got some tea leaves from the EPA about lead last week. I know I'm not supposed to date the podcast, but they basically said they're looking at the improvements and going to keep the core of it in place, but they inserted some language that enabled them to have some wiggle room on things moving forward. How do we deal with that? There's questions about funding. Obviously, the Trump administration has different funding priorities than the Biden administration. What does that mean for our ability to replace those lines by 2037? Especially if the regulations remain in place, if the funding goes away, how realistic are those regulations? So we have to deal with that. Then on the PFAS side, they decided that they wanted to rescind the other drinking water standards and keep the focus on PFOA and PFOS. Well, in some ways that's great because there was a lot of question about some of the standards for those shorter chain PFAS. But OA and ORS are the main financial drivers that are going to cost the most money to clean up and clean up in the situation we didn't create ourselves. We don't use a drop. We don't produce a drop of PFAS in our water treatment processes, yet we have to deal with it. So sorry for the longer answer there, but basically what I tell people is with the shifting sands that we know are coming, that are here, the more you communicate about where you are, what your situation is, what you have to consider moving forward, the better off you're going to be. I mean, on lead, the LCRI, the inventory work started the process of finding lead wherever it is so we can develop a fair and equitable plan to replace it. And that doesn't matter with the LCR or LCRI. That message is still the same. We're going to find lead and we're going to get it out properly over a course of time because it will take time. With PFAS, we have our numbers. If we have a finding, we're going to get that out and deal with those findings to make sure that we are always going to be in compliance with the regulations. That's the no-brainer. We're always going to comply. And as long as we're communicating about where we are and how we have to deal with those situations, we're going to be better off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that goes back to like the proactive versus only communicate in crisis, right? Like it's just, but I guess, Mike, how do you make that case to the average utility that, hey, communicate transparently and often, not just pull me in when there's a crisis? How do you overcome that? I'm just curious.
Because the way I say it is proactive communications can help you avoid a crisis or make them far easier to manage. In some cases, I've had people come up to me and like, listen, we've got such major gaps. I'm worried that things are going to blow up tomorrow. And I say, well, in that case, you got to go to your boss and say, listen, if we don't handle this proactively, if we wait for the bomb to drop, you have to tell that person how quickly can they pack up their office because they will lose their job if things go downhill. It has to be that stark. I mean, and I'm not overselling here. I deal in public communications. I've dealt with real and perceived crises that have cost people jobs. So, when we're brought in on a crisis, no matter what the crisis is, whether or not it's a situation the utilities never dealt with before, or they thought they could deal with and they dug themselves a deeper hole. When I come in, the first thing I do to solve their problem is to get them on a regular, consistent schedule of communications throughout the day in the middle of the crisis. And so by rolling out that information, you repair some of the damage and you build trust. Well, guess what? When that crisis is over, and ideally you communicate through the end of the crisis, through hot washes, you're explaining how we're going to keep this situation hopefully from happening again. you've made the case. I've used proactive communications to get you out of trouble. So guess what? Now use proactive communications when the skies are blue, not when everything's going to hell. And you're going to be better off when something else happens, and something else will happen. I mean, I don't know of a utility that hasn't had to deal with some sort of a sensitive situation, because we provide a service that people can't live without. So if something goes sideways, that's an elevated level of incident, of situation that the public is going to have going to want answers about. So you've got to be there providing those answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you do. And, I think about the other stakeholders that we often need to talk to, like how would you advise folks that work at utilities to convince their boards or city leaders to invest in communications the same way they invest in other infrastructure?
So it's been my experience that board members, elected officials, their staffs have an understanding of the storm that can happen if they're not communicating properly. Usually they've achieved that position by working their way up or working in situations that have a higher level of attention. So ideally, there's a little bit of that background already that's laid some groundwork. But what I always say to people is you have to treat your communications just like any other operation, because you can have the best operational plan going. You could be chugging on all cylinders every single day. But if something goes wrong and you haven't been communicating about it, you don't have proper communications in place, you can end up looking like you have the worst operations, that you're completely incompetent, that you don't know what you're doing, even though you've been chugging along for year after year after year after year. I just told a story of someone a utility that communicated the same way about chlorine maintenance, using the words chlorine burn for years. And it was perfectly fine. No one had an issue with it. Then someone sees chlorine burn, saw a little bit of a rash on their kid's arm, goes to social media, and all of a sudden they've got a Facebook page with 15,000 people on it, and they're bringing Aaron Brockovich to town. And they didn't do anything wrong. They were communicating the same way they always had been, and nothing had caused a problem until it finally did. So, we helped assist with that, kind of cleared that up. But in the next year, we had a proactive communications plan in place where we were telling people what was coming. We used water system maintenance instead of chlorine burn. And we told people what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, well in advance, because we know when we're going to do it. And sure enough, the next year, nothing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No problems whatsoever. No firestorm, no selling tickets to come see Aaron Brockovich, none of that. And it was simply because, they just had to improve their communications.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that model is going to be so important as we think about the rollout of LCRI. And I just have this hypothesis that, the school testing portion of LCRI, exactly to the point that you raised about the social media, the PTAs, like when those first letters or notifications start coming home that my school is getting tested for lead, that utilities have to use you or adopt exactly what you're talking about, Mike, to navigate that wave of that compliance, because it's going to hit young children and PTAs. And I feel like this industry needs to be ready for those types of pieces of the regulation. What do you say to that, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. I might be giving away some of the story here, but I think we're on good ground when it comes to dealing with schools and child cares moving forward because of the way the regulations have been built. But you have to do another stage of communication. So when we do school and child care communications, our biggest thing is, first, you got to get everybody within government entities on board. So this is a classic case where there's safety in numbers. If you, the utility, are working with the school system, you're working with the health department, because they oversee the schools and the child cares, and you're all in it together. You bring them in and say, listen, this is the work that's going to be coming in the future. It's going to be high profile. It's going to be about lead. You're going to be talking to parents who are worried about their kids. let's all get together and get on the same page and co-brand everything. Here's our logo. Here's your logo. Here's their logo. Everybody's on the same page with all the messaging. There's safety in numbers there. And you won't get different answers from different entities, which is a classic problem when you're dealing with different governmental organizations. So you do that internal work first, and then you go forth and communicate about the work you're doing in the schools and the work you're doing with the child care systems or child cares. And so if you're doing that work, you're on the same page, and then you're putting out the information together, co-branded across the board. Those parents know that you have done the work before you've come to them, that you're all set and ready to go and you're on top of it. And they're not going to go to the school system and say, did you hear about what the water utility is doing? Because we at the water utility put out the communications and didn't involve the school system. Same thing with the child cares. They're overseen by health departments normally. If I'm the utility, I'm putting out word to the child care, the child care providers, and ignoring the health department. Where are those providers going to go? They're going to go to the health department and say, do I have to do this? What does this mean? If I get a lead hit, am I going to be out of business?
Oh, yeah.
So that's where you get internally. Yeah. I mean, this is lifeblood. This is why at the start of the regs, there are a lot of child care providers who are like, I'm not letting you in the door to test for lead, because if you find it, that could be the end of me. Now, if you're working with the health department and there's a lead finding with a child care provider, here's the communications you use. Here's the process we're going to use to make sure that you don't lose your business. And if you've got that on the same page, then you communicate about that. The business is protected. The schools are protected. From those reactions that you alluded to at the start. You're dealing with mothers, you're dealing with PTAs, you're dealing with impacts on young children where, if I'm a typical person, I'm going to be upset if I find out that my child care provider has a lead service line, has a finding for lead. Same thing with the school. So it's two-stage. Get the internal ducks in a row so everybody's on the same page, and then you go forth together. You're not divided and conquered.
Yeah. It's so smart.
Yeah. And you've already touched on this a number of times. I'm going to give another come at it another angle, but one of the things that I've observed in the lead and copper rule revisions and the PFAS legislation and CCR is that those regulations have created some component of requiring more transparency, publishing things on digitally, or having micro websites to communicate. So there's some level of good there where it has a bare minimum requirement. So there's kind of a two-part. What role does transparency play in building long-term trust? That's what you've been hitting on. But also, how should utilities think about, what's the risk of only doing the bare minimum of what's required versus how they should localize that story better?
So transparency is obviously a key building block to building or maintaining trust. I mean, if we are out there pushing out information to the public, they can go to our website anytime, day or night, to get that information. If they call in and they've got higher level questions and they want to speak to the head of the lead and copper program with the utility, they can talk to that person within 24 to 48 hours. If you provide that level of transparency with information and access to experts, then they're less likely to go to Google. They're less likely to go to their phone. And when they go to their phone or go to Google, they're likely to get information that isn't correct, that is designed to inflame, especially on lead, especially on PFAS. So if you're out there and you are pushing forward with that transparency, and I always call it planned transparency, you are pushing out the information yourself. So you have control over the information you're providing. Some people get scared when they hear the word transparency, like I'm opening the books and everything, all the sausage making is out there on the table. No, that's not necessarily the case. That can be the case if you haven't been communicated and someone demands to see everything you've done. But if you're out there first with the information that also takes into account the negative questions you might get, if you've got that all ready to go and roll that out, then the public trust in what you're doing and how you're doing it is going to increase. It's going to be consistent throughout your work, which is what we need for years of compliance on lead and PFAS and other issues. What was the second half of your question again?
What are the consequences for just checking the box?
When I think about, the regulation kind of has like, hey, here's bare minimum, do this, but like how should utilities think about best practices versus bare minimum?
So this is the thing about bare minimum. You check that box off, and whenever you check off a box and you cross your fingers, that's not a good way to go. So, for lead, there's an interpretation here in South Carolina that really your next communication doesn't even have to happen until July of next year. The way they've looked at it, the way they talked to the EPA. What I advise the client is, at minimum, when they got their 30-day letter in October, November of last year, we said we were going to notify them annually, at least, on what was coming up, how we were doing. So you've kind of made that compact that you've got to put that information out again, at least at the year level. But what we always say is, core component of a good proactive communications plan is wherever you have a milestone, wherever you have progress that you can say to the public, here's what we're doing, here's how the numbers are changing on the unknowns that we had. We had 3,000 last year. We're down to 2,000. Those big numbers that the public will latch onto. Any milestone like that is a good public message. And listen, if you don't get coverage for it, you didn't waste your time. It's out there. It's on your website. You've put it out there. It's a building block. You're showing that's that plan transparency. You're showing you're transparent. You're showing you're willing to come to the customer, whether or not you get coverage for it, with information about how well you're doing your job. That builds and holds that trust that we need for long-term compliance work, like on lead and like on PFAS.
Yeah.
And I have to think that, how many times, Mike, I'm sure you've never gotten this, for the box checkers of the world, but we don't have budget. We don't have budget to do the additional things you're talking about. But I mean, have you ever thought about like the cost of not doing those extra things when it comes to that long-term loyalty and trust building with the customers? Is that something that ever comes up in your conversations with utilities?
Well, this is where, they're rolling the dice, and you don't really want to roll the dice with your career or the reputation of your utility. Here's the thing, and this is what I brought to the table in 2007 when I started, and I've had arguments with other people in my field who say your next hire should be someone who's an expert on TikTok. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. That's not the way to go. Your next hire needs to be a former journalist, because guess what? Earned media is cheap. I'm giving away some of the story here, but I'm a former news producer, and this is how I was successful in my field, because I brought this into the industry. That you don't keep the press at arm's length. You bring them to the hole in the middle of the night when they're covering a water main break. You don't keep them 100 yards away. And if you're doing that proactive work and saying, I've got a story for you that impacts almost every reader or viewer you have, that's my pitch. And usually they're going to take that and going to run with it. If they don't take it, then guess what? I'm going to pitch it again the next time. But how much does that cost? It costs nothing except for preparation, staff time, maybe a bit of concern and a little bit of training. What happens when the press comes up to your site, or on this, you're doing a little media training or whatever. But that piece in that paper or online, whatever it may be, costs $0. I'm not, this is where the frustration is. There is a place for social media content. Absolutely. That's that planned transparency we're talking about. But if I got major information to get out to 20,000 people instead of 200, I'm going to mass media in that regard and not producing a video for TikTok How many people are on TikTok to get information from their water and sewer utility? Very few. Now, there are great ones out there, and their work helps with that transparency and trust bit. Absolutely. I'm not knocking their work in any way, shape, or form, but we've gone kind of passive aggressive. We've taken the easy route instead of the route where there's a little bit of risk involved, but the payoff is exponentially higher. And that is to say, here's my story. I'm going to roll out this press release. I'm going to tell you about it in advance. Come and cover us, or come and cover where we're doing work. And that story goes out to thousands, tens of thousands of people for $0. And that's how I make my case when it comes to proactive comms.
Yeah, it really is. It's like anything else. If you lead with some level of vulnerability and trust, that you're trusting the local news media to say, hey, we're building a relationship of trust. I'm not telling you what to say, but I am inviting you to the conversation. That can be a game changer.
Well, I'll give you an example. When I was planning press coverage in a DC newsroom, I juggled 16 different stories a day while I was setting up other coverage a week down the road. So I'm juggling all sorts of stories. And if I get a call, and I'm looking for stories, it's very different if I'm looking for a story and I go online and I'm typing in Flint or typing in lead and get Flint, than if the utility comes to me and said, you might have heard about the lead regulations. This is what we're doing about it. You've just made my life easier. You've come to me with a story that again, connects every one of my viewers and readers. I'm going to give you a fairer shake than if I look up, I have to go find that information myself because my utility hasn't been communicating with me about it. And I come at you with a very different set of questions than if you come to me proactively and say, this is what we're doing about lead. That was my experience in the newsroom. It's basic human nature. You come to me first. This is that catchphrase I always use. Hear from you first, trust you first. Hear from you last, trust to the last. If I heard about a controversial issue first from the people directly involved in it, I treated them very differently than if I discovered something on my own and went to them and say, what say you about this? This is what I found. You haven't said a word. It's very different.
Yeah, that changes everything.
Yeah.
That posture for sure. I think our last question too is like, where do you see communication in this sector headed over the next 5 to 10 years?
So this is where I'm going to be a bit of a heretic and a Debbie Downer. I see us being exactly where we are now, just with a different set of circumstances. Where we are right now is exactly where we were 5 years before, 5 years before that, when I started in 2007. We still have to cut through the fact that people only think about us when there's a bad bill or a bad break or something else possibly controversial or some major project that somehow rises to the top. It's the same thing I was dealing with in 2007 is the same thing I'm dealing with now. Yes, we have other issues, and we alluded to this earlier. We have other issues that are kind of, bringing more attention to the matter. But that headline is usually generated by the fact I got to spend $40 or $50 million for PFAS treatment, or X community has lead service lines, and the work you're doing in that community to make sure that they're informed, make sure that they don't believe they're drinking lead. We still have to cut through the same noise. And a lot of utilities, this was that TikTok example. I was up in arms when I heard this a couple of years ago, and I was considered a Luddite. You're an old guy. You're not worried about social media. TikTok's the way to go. No, it wasn't. And in fact, the person who was pounding away on me for that actually came out a couple of weeks ago and said, yeah, social media is maybe not the best path for the major issues of the day. And that's why I think we are going to be in the same place. When we talk about the other parts of the space, Megan, and the innovations that 120 Waters brought to the table and everything like that, there's an audience for that. And there's going to be more and more communications about that, kind of the higher level, if you will. But at the core customer communications level, I see us being in the same place we are now, having to cut through and get the public to understand what we do and how we do it, and to fund us properly so we can do it.
Well, I mean, thank you, Mike, for being a change agent and trying to change all of that through your work and your career, and now through WaterPIO, because I know it may not look at in your seat, right, but you are making a difference, and so you're doing incredible work, and we are just pleased and proud that we've gotten to work alongside you along the way. So if folks want to get in touch with WaterPIO, where can they find you?
So we have a storefront webpage, waterpio.com, where you can get through in touch with us. But, email mike@waterpio.com, info@waterpio.com. We have a 24-hour phone number that you can call or text because those emergencies happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's 910-622-8472. That's on our website, waterpio.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. But basically you look us up, reach out to us, and it's our job to be there. That's the always on call message. You need something right away, we're there for you to do it. If you need overall planning, we're there for you to do it. We're doing crisis communications work. We're doing crisis communications work right now and planning work. So everything soup to nuts we can do when it comes to customer immediate crisis comes.
Yeah, for sure. And I really do encourage folks to make sure you follow Mike McGill on LinkedIn.
Yes.
If you're in the water industry and are looking for hot takes on what's happening, whether that's in DC or at the local level, like you're going to get a perspective. Yep. And so I think it generates the right kind of conversations that we need to be having, that are forcing us to think critically about what we need to do in water to make water work for everyone, but what we need to do to make water work for the people who make water work for everyone. It's complex, and it's and it takes it takes a whole team of people dedicated to that cause.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add is at the end is people will ask me, I ask the question, who do you think I work for in a crisis or just in a situation where I'm communicating with the public? And people say I'm working for the customer. No, that's actually not the case. I work for the utility. My job is to make their lives easier, to either in a crisis situation or when they're dealing with PFAS or lead overall. Good communications works for the utility. And through that work, I'm informing the public so they feel better about the utility. But I don't work for the customer. I work for the utility. And that's where good communications assists all the operations, everything that takes place in an organization.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, utility works for the customers.
Yep. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for taking this time, Mike. I know you're kind of double booked on speaking and probably heading to your to another speaking gig in the next day or so. But
thanks.
Yeah, always appreciate the time to have a conversation with you.
Well, Mike gave us a lot of great content there. And I again, back to the servant leader, he shares, like he will share best practices. He doesn't gate, good things and what he believes utilities should be doing. And I really hope that those listening really appreciated a lot of just the advice, the practical storytelling and everything that Mike has to share that can actually make our utilities better communicators.
Yeah, it really is. And, even the fact that he's dialing in to be on our podcast after filling in to give a speech at South Carolina Rural Water. He's just been a good partner of the entire ecosystem. And so we love what he brings to the conversation. And this was so great. Thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, and post, and let us know who you want to hear from on the Make Water Work podcast. And we can't wait to let you listen in on the next conversation.
Thanks for listening to the Make Water Work podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a conversation. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Connect with us on LinkedIn or send us a message. Together, we can make water work for everyone.